There's an aircraft that could potentially be operating somewhere over the Caribbean or South America right now. An aircraft capable of finding a boat in the darkness from thousands of feet above the ocean and attacking it with precision weapons or heavy cannon fire. And if that aircraft does enter this fight, cartel organizations have a serious problem. I'm talking about the AC-130J Ghost Rider. Now, to be clear, the AC-130J has not necessarily been publicly confirmed as operating in this particular theater, but that's part of what makes this story so interesting. Because while the aircraft itself may not be confirmed, the larger military buildup around Central America, the Caribbean, the Panama Canal in South America is becoming increasingly difficult to ignore. Today, we're looking at the AC-130J Ghost Rider, the growing U.S. military focus on cartel-linked maritime trafficking, and the multinational military exercises now taking place around the Panama Canal. And there's a lot happening. The AC-130J can carry Hellfire missiles, small-diameter bombs, and powerful onboard guns. Its weapon system includes a 30mm cannon and a 105mm howitzer mounted into the aircraft. That gives it an unusual combination of surveillance, precision strike capability, and heavy firepower. And according to figures discussed in connection with a U.S. campaign against suspected narco-trafficking vessels, dozens of boats have already been targeted since last September. But now, the activity appears to be expanding. MQ-9 Reapers, RQ-4 Global Hawks, military personnel moving through Panama, jungle warfare training, and multinational forces participating in Panamax 2026, 19 nations, one strategically critical canal, and a very clear message about protecting the Western Hemisphere from organized criminal networks and other threats. So let's break down exactly what's happening. Because this isn't just about one aircraft. It's about how air power, intelligence, special operations forces, maritime assets, and multinational military cooperation could fit together into one much larger campaign. And the AC-130J could be one of the most interesting aircraft in that entire equation. The Ghost Rider brings together a combination of weapons that makes it particularly suited for persistent overwatch. There's the 30mm GAU-23 cannon. There's the 100mm howitzer. There are Hellfire missiles. And there are small-diameter bombs. Those small-diameter bombs are approximately 250-pound class precision weapons designed to strike targets accurately from standoff distances. Depending on the weapon configuration and mission, precision targeting can involve GPS guidance, laser designation, and other targeting systems. The aircraft itself can also operate alongside forces on the ground that provide additional information about targets, and that matters enormously in a counter-trafficking environment. Because finding a suspicious vessel isn't necessarily the same thing as identifying what it is, who owns it, where it's going, and whether it can legally be engaged. That requires intelligence. It requires surveillance, it requires identification, and it requires command and control. That's where aircraft such as MQ-9 Reapers become extremely important. There have also been reports and discussions surrounding armed MQ-9 operations from locations such as Puerto Rico and El Salvador. At the same time, jungle operations training is expanding. And Panamax 2026 is bringing together military forces from across the hemisphere. And we're talking about countries including Panama, Colombia, Mexico, Brazil, Argentina, Chile, Peru, Ecuador, the Dominican Republic, Jamaica, and numerous other Central American and Caribbean partners. There are also participants from outside the hemisphere, including the United Kingdom and the Netherlands. That's a remarkable coalition. And the history of Panamax makes this even more significant. The exercise began in 2003 with only 3 participating countries, Chile, Panama, and the United States. Its original focus was protecting the Panama Canal. That makes sense. The canal is one of the world's most strategically important waterways. We've watched the importance of maritime choke points become increasingly obvious in recent years. The Red Sea, the Strait of Hormuz, and now the Panama Canal. Any disruption to a major waterway can have consequences far beyond the immediate region. That's why military planners take these locations so seriously. And this year's exercise is considerably larger. 19 flags, thousands of personnel, multiple military capabilities, and a command structure designed to coordinate the defense of one of the most important strategic waterways in the Western Hemisphere. But underneath the exercise itself, there's another development that deserves attention. A new 4-star command structure has reportedly been employed during the exercise, with a tactical command post operating on the ground in Panama. The U.S. Army has described this as its most significant physical footprint in Panama in more than a decade. And the capabilities being practiced aren't limited to traditional canal defense, hazardous material response, counter-drone operations, military working dogs, security operations, command and control. All of these capabilities can matter in a modern conflict environment. And that's why this starts looking like something bigger than a simple training exercise. Because just days earlier, the Temporary Joint Task Force Southern Spear structure was shut down and replaced by Joint Task Force Western Hemisphere. That represents a broader organizational shift. Southern Spear was heavily associated with operations involving maritime trafficking and activity around Venezuela. The new structure suggests a more comprehensive approach to transnational threats across the hemisphere. And that brings us back to the AC-130J. Because if you're trying to understand how a military could monitor and respond to maritime trafficking across enormous stretches of ocean, you have to understand what the Ghost Rider actually brings to the fight. The large weapon mounted on the side of the aircraft is the M102 100mm howitzer. And there's something almost bizarre about the history of this system. The M102 originated as a towed Army artillery weapon. Now imagine taking that artillery capability and putting it inside a 4-engine aircraft. That's essentially the concept behind the AC-130 family. Turn an aircraft into a flying weapons platform capable of remaining overhead and providing sustained fire support. The concept goes all the way back to the Vietnam era. The aircraft was designed around missions involving nighttime operations, special operations support, armed overwatch, and close air support. And that mission set remains relevant today. The modern AC-130J Ghost Rider is a heavily modified C-130J platform. It can reach a maximum takeoff weight of roughly 164,000 pounds. It uses 4 Rolls-Royce turboprop engines. Its maximum speed is around 416 miles per hour. Its operational range can reach approximately 3,000 miles, with aerial refueling extending that considerably. Its ceiling is roughly 28,000 feet. And then you get to the weapons. A 30mm GAU-23 cannon, a 195 Nidus weapon, external hardpoints capable of carrying precision weapons, Hellfires, small diameter bombs, and other missile systems depending on configuration. The aircraft is operated by Air Force Special Operations Command. The AC-130J reached initial operational capability in 2017, and its first combat missions came in Afghanistan in 2019. That history matters, because the Ghost Rider wasn't designed to simply fly over a battlefield and drop one bomb. It was designed to provide persistent armed overwatch, to stay in the area, to observe, to communicate, and, when authorized, to provide precise fire support to forces operating below. That's exactly why the aircraft could potentially be useful against maritime trafficking. Imagine a small vessel traveling at night. It's difficult to detect from the ground. It has limited communications. It's attempting to reach a coastal location before disappearing into a jungle or isolated island. The military challenge isn't simply destroying the boat, it's finding it in the first place. That's where sensors and surveillance become critical. And once you combine those sensors with intelligence from satellites, drones, maritime patrol aircraft, ships, and forces on the ground, the picture starts to change. Suddenly, that little boat isn't necessarily invisible anymore. The aircraft may be able to track it. Other platforms may be able to identify it, and forces in the region may already be positioned to respond. That's the real advantage of a networked military system. One platform doesn't have to do everything. The drone can find the target, the aircraft can maintain overwatch. A ship can intercept, a special operations team can provide information, and command authorities can coordinate the entire operation. That's a very different environment from the one cartel organizations have historically operated in. For years, traffickers have relied on geography, remote coastlines, small islands, jungle hideouts, hidden airstrips, and routes across open water. But geography only works as protection when you can hide inside it, and modern surveillance technology makes hiding increasingly difficult. Some trafficking vessels simply can't travel indefinitely across open ocean. Semi-submersible vessels have been intercepted before, other boats have been tracked by maritime surveillance assets. And drones have dramatically changed the equation. A small vessel that once might have disappeared into the darkness can now potentially be tracked by aircraft operating thousands of feet above it. That doesn't mean every boat is automatically detected. It doesn't mean every suspected vessel can be legally or militarily attacked. And it certainly doesn't mean the AC-130J is confirmed to be operating in every location being discussed. But it does demonstrate why the aircraft is so relevant to this conversation. Now imagine the cartel response. They could attempt to move closer to the coastline. They could hide inside isolated coves. They could use remote jungle locations. They could move between islands. They could alter routes. They could attempt to rely more heavily on aircraft. But every one of those options creates a different surveillance problem. And that's why this isn't simply a contest between a cartel boat and an aircraft. It's a competition between an entire intelligence network and an organization trying to remain hidden. And that brings us to the broader military picture. The AC-130J doesn't have to operate alone. Imagine an aircraft such as an F-35, F-16, or another fighter operating as part of the same mission architecture. Those aircraft can provide additional sensors, communications, and air coverage. Aerial refueling can extend the range and endurance of aircraft operating far from their home bases. An airborne radar platform can help create a larger picture of what is happening across the region. And the Ghost Rider can potentially operate closer to the action while receiving information from other platforms. This is where military doctrine becomes extremely important. During operations in Afghanistan, fast-moving aircraft could operate above AC-130 gunships, while the gunships performed their own missions at lower altitudes. That kind of layered air power allows different aircraft to perform different jobs. One aircraft sees farther, another moves faster. Another carries precision weapons. Another remains overhead longer. Together, they form a much more capable system. And, for special operations forces operating on the ground, that kind of air support can be extremely valuable. Think about the kinds of units that could potentially be involved in missions against organized criminal networks, special operations forces, Green Berets, Navy SEALs, other specialized military or law enforcement teams. The people operating on the ground need accurate information from above, and that's where armed overwatch becomes important. The AC-130J was essentially designed around that concept. It can monitor an area, communicate with ground forces, track activity, and, when authorized, provide fire support. That combination makes it one of the most unusual aircraft in the U.S. inventory. But the AC-130J is only one part of this developing story, because while the Western Hemisphere is seeing increasing military activity, major developments are happening elsewhere around the world. Let's move to the global picture. In the Black Sea, Ukraine carried out another significant strike against Russia's naval infrastructure. The attack reportedly targeted the Russian Black Sea Fleet base at Novorossiysk. Ukraine's general staff said multiple Russian warships were damaged. Reports indicated that vessels, including the frigates Admiral Makarov and Admiral Essen, along with a Bayan-M-class missile ship and a patrol vessel, were affected. The full extent of the damage remained under assessment. But the bigger story is the weapons Ukraine is now using against Russian naval forces. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky described the attack as involving jet-powered drone missiles, Neptune cruise missiles, and maritime drones. And that is significant, because Ukraine continues to develop its own long-range strike capabilities. It doesn't need every weapon system to come from foreign donors. It is increasingly producing and improving systems domestically. Maritime drones have already changed naval warfare. Now we're seeing increasingly sophisticated combinations of drones and missiles being used against major naval installations. That creates a serious problem for Russia. And then there's Taiwan. During military exercises, mobile data service in Taipei and surrounding areas was reportedly throttled dramatically. Connectivity dropped to extremely low speeds. People took shelter inside subway stations. Streets emptied. And the exercise was designed to simulate conditions that could emerge during a major conflict. This was part of Taiwan's Han Kuang military exercise. The purpose isn't simply to practice shooting weapons, it's to practice what happens when the entire country is under pressure. Communications, transportation, civil defense, military mobilization, infrastructure, and the ability to keep functioning while an adversary attempts to disrupt the island. The strategic backdrop is obvious. Taiwan has spent years preparing for the possibility of a Chinese military attack. And while nobody can say exactly when or if such a conflict would happen, Taiwan is clearly trying to make sure that an invasion would not be easy. The lesson from modern warfare is that communications can become a battlefield themselves. If an adversary can disrupt communications, it can create confusion without firing a single shot. That's why military exercises increasingly simulate degraded networks and electronic warfare. And then there is a tragic development in the United States. An AH-64E Apache based at Fort Hood was involved in a crash near Salado, Texas. 2 service members aboard the helicopter were killed. According to reports, the flight was a routine training mission. There is no way around how serious that is. Training is essential because military personnel need to be prepared before they ever face combat. But training itself carries risks. The crews who fly these aircraft, the mechanics who maintain them, and the personnel who support them all understand that every mission carries responsibility. The loss of 2 service members affects not only their families, but their entire unit. So our thoughts are with their families, friends, and fellow service members during this difficult time. And that brings us back to the bigger strategic picture. Why is the United States increasing its focus on cartel organizations across the Western Hemisphere? One reason is that trafficking networks are adapting. If maritime routes become more difficult, traffickers can attempt to shift toward aircraft. If major ports become more heavily monitored, they can attempt to use remote coastal locations. If conventional boats become easier to detect, they can experiment with semi-submersibles or other methods. Every time authorities close one route, criminal organizations look for another. And that's exactly why the military response is becoming increasingly networked. It's not simply about one gunship, it's about the combination: MQ-9 Reapers, long-range surveillance aircraft, fighter aircraft, maritime forces, special operations teams, intelligence networks. partner nations, and command structures designed to coordinate them. Now picture that system operating across thousands of miles. An aircraft detects movement over the ocean. Another platform provides additional surveillance. Intelligence analysts determine whether the activity is suspicious. A maritime asset moves into position. Ground teams monitor possible landing zones. And aircraft remain available to provide support if the mission requires it. That's the kind of system that makes traditional trafficking routes much more difficult to exploit. And among all those platforms, the AC-130J remains particularly interesting. Because unlike a fighter that may arrive, release weapons, and leave, the Ghost Rider is designed around persistence. It can remain overhead, it can observe, it can communicate, and it can potentially provide multiple forms of fire support. That's why the AC-130 family has remained relevant for decades. The aircraft keeps evolving, the sensors become better, the weapons become more accurate, the communications become more sophisticated, and the mission continues to adapt. The key question now is whether we will see more high-value strikes against cartel-linked organizations and trafficking networks in the coming months. If the current military buildup continues, the pressure on these networks could become much more intense. And if additional surveillance aircraft, drones, maritime assets, and special operations forces are integrated into the same theater, the ability of trafficking organizations to move undetected could become significantly harder. But there's still an important distinction. The presence of military exercises does not automatically mean an AC-130J is conducting combat operations in the region. The presence of MQ-9s does not mean every suspected vessel is being targeted. And military cooperation doesn't automatically translate into offensive action. What it does show is preparation. It's a demonstration of capability, and it's a signal that the United States and its regional partners are building a much more integrated security structure across the Western Hemisphere. 19 nations participating in a major exercise, a new command structure, jungle warfare training, surveillance aircraft, maritime operations, and increasingly sophisticated intelligence networks. Put all of that together, and the strategic picture becomes much bigger than one aircraft. The AC-130J Ghost Rider may be one of the most intimidating pieces of that puzzle. But the real story is the network surrounding it. Because in modern warfare, the most dangerous weapon isn't always the aircraft carrying the biggest gun. Sometimes it's the system that allows that aircraft to know exactly where to look. And right now, that system across the Western Hemisphere is getting larger, more coordinated, and more capable. The cartels have spent years adapting to law enforcement. Now they may have to adapt to something considerably more complicated. A military network built around persistent surveillance, multinational cooperation, drones, special operations forces, and precision air power. The question is no longer simply whether these organizations can hide. The question is whether they can keep moving once the entire environment around them becomes harder to disappear into. And if the AC-130J eventually becomes part of that equation, the Ghost Rider could become one of the most important aircraft to watch. Because when you combine persistent surveillance with precision weapons, long-range aircraft, drones, maritime forces, and forces on the ground, the entire battlefield changes. And that is exactly what makes the developments happening across the Western Hemisphere right now so significant.